and thanks for staying with us. This is Today with John and Helen. We're on to a special edition of the program today, and we're focusing on diabetes. Of course, I have someone with me who knows all about diabetes, and especially now that we are in the month of diabetes awareness, we really need to know the numbers. Dr. Nesochi is a New York City area-based physician, health expert, media contributor, and health writer. She is not only a practicing internist, she's also a civil surgeon designated by the United States Department of Homeland Security and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Dr. Nesochi is the CEO of the Internal Medicine Private Practice. She is a health media company practitioner, yes, and supermodel MD of LLC. Well, all of that sounds like Greek to me for now, but she will help us out. Dr. Nesochi is a trusted media resource and a respected international health expert who often corrects misinformation about the latest health trends and encourages a measured and thoughtful process to personal health. She's been featured and quoted in numerous media outlets ranging from Forbes, CNN, Vogue, Opera Daily, BBC, Voice of America, you want to hear more? Better Homes and Gardens, Glamour, Allure, Marie Claire, Cosmopolitan, CBS News, Fox News, CNBC Africa, and I'm running out of breath now, Reader's Digest, Teen Vogue, InStyle, Self, Shape, and so on. It is indeed my pleasure to bring on our set our special guest today to talk about diabetes, what we should know, Dr. Nesochi. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
So, now the bio, like you say, was breathtaking. Okay? I'm not sure we'll have enough time to break it all down today. That will be another program.
Sure.
But today we are looking at diabetes. And as simple and common as it is, there's a lot more to learn.
Yes.
Could you please tell us what exactly, just let's pretend that we don't know.
Sure.
What exactly is diabetes and how does it affect the body?
Yeah. So diabetes is a chronic medical condition in which one has elevations in their blood glucose or blood sugar levels. And the most common type is type 2 diabetes. And I think I need to let you know normally what happens when you eat and what happens in a diabetic.
So, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
We'll come to that. But when you say elevation, what are we elevating?
So we're talking about high blood sugar levels.
Levels. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so now, step 2.
Yes.
At least now I feel a little comfortable that we understand a little better what diabetes is. Now, step 2. I'd like you to please briefly explain the difference between type 1 and type 2 and the gestational diabetes. We've heard a bit about that as well. Could you just throw some light on that?
Yeah, so type 1 diabetes, that means the body cannot produce the insulin that's needed. Type 2 diabetes, the most common type, that occurs when there's what we call insulin resistance. Gestational diabetes is what can occur in the context of pregnancy. But I think to best kind of understand what happens in this diabetes state, we need to understand when we all eat any kind of food.
Okay.
So when we eat any meal, in response to eating the meal, our blood glucose, our blood sugar levels start to rise.
Okay.
In response to
any food at all?
Yes, when you eat food, blood sugar levels start to rise.
Great.
In response to that rise in blood sugar levels, this pretty much stimulates or tells an organ called the pancreas to basically produce insulin.
Okay.
Insulin acts like a key. So what does insulin do? Insulin is going to be that key that will help that elevated sugar, that elevated glucose in the blood to travel out of the bloodstream and go into your cells. And your cells throughout the body can now use that glucose as energy. So the problem that actually occurs in somebody who is a diabetic they have an issue with basically the body not responding.
Not regulating.
The body is not responding properly to insulin, or they are underproducing that insulin. So we cannot use that insulin properly to bring the elevated blood sugar, move the sugars from the blood into the cells for energy. So you just have all of this, all of these sugars just building up in the bloodstream. Because the body is not able to use the insulin properly, what we call insulin resistance. So when we have that buildup, that excess amount of sugars in the bloodstream, that is when it starts causing problems.
Okay, so we'll go on to problems now. Because I'd like to know how do I feel when the level of sugar has reached such a point when, what are the symptoms? What are the common symptoms of diabetics? And what should we watch out for?
So common symptoms. If you are experiencing some of these symptoms I'm about to mention, you need to see your doctor to get checked out and screened to see if there may be an issue with diabetes. So one thing you may notice is increased frequency of urination. So you are running to the restroom all the time to urinate.
At any time of the day?
Yes, any time of the day, a lot at night as well.
Because a few nights ago I did quite some brushing myself.
So there are a lot of symptoms. So, and just to put it in context, just because one may exhibit or may experience one of these symptoms, that doesn't necessarily mean you have diabetes. But anytime you have symptoms that come up, you should get checked out to ensure that there are no health issues. But with that said, increased frequency of urination, increased thirst, extreme lethargy, fatigue, or weakness, unexplained weight loss. One might exhibit or experience wounds or cuts that are unable to heal properly. You can feel numbness or tingling in the fingers or in the feet.
Don't scare me.
But the list is quite exhaustive. But with all that said, if you experience any of those symptoms can be attributed to other things as well. However, it can also be attributed to diabetes. And another one that's important to mention, visual disturbances, changes in vision, blurry vision, that can be a symptom as well. So when you experience any of these things, you need to get checked out and ensure that there's no cause for concern.
And if you're active sexually?
Oh, well, another symptom could be...
I know that.
Another symptom could be sexual dysfunction. So that is another symptom that can occur in the context of somebody with diabetes.
So these are kind of like the obvious signs. Are there any subtle signs? Maybe signs undercover?
I wouldn't say signs undercover, but I think there's some generalized symptoms that can really be attributed to other health conditions. That's why, for instance, extreme fatigue or lethargy, if you experience that, everyone can feel fatigue or weakness or lethargic from time to time. But if you're always feeling, in a low energy state, that's one to look out for.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, as you were speaking, my mind went to some other area. Like here, we would say, it's not my portion. Is it diabetes? Is it genetic? Is anyone exempted from, getting it? Who catches
So, I mean, when they say it's not my portion, no one is really exempt or immune or unable to potentially have a diabetes diagnosis in the future. There are risk factors that I want to talk about that put one at risk for diabetes. One thing that you alluded to, family history. So yes, there can be a genetic predisposition. So you are at higher risk for diabetes if you have a family member, first degree family member, meaning mom, dad, or siblings who have diabetes. That heightens your risk for developing diabetes. Another risk factor that you have no control of, the aging process. As we all get older, that also increases our risk for diabetes. Starting from the age of 45 and older, your risk continues to increase.
Does it mean that your body doesn't break down the sugar content or whatever?
Yeah, so it just means that you're more likely over the course of time to have these issues with insulin resistance throughout the course of time as you age.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then other risk factors. There are those risk factors that we do have control of. So being overweight or obese, if you're able to manage your weight, you are able to minimize and lower the risk, because added weight on the body can contribute to those problems, to insulin resistance. So that's another risk factor, weight. And then also certain lifestyle choices that one makes. So if you are one that leads a sedentary lifestyle, you are not really active, you don't move around a lot, you're always just sitting, no physical activity, that increases the risk. And another one that I always like to make mention of to my patients, smoking. If you are a smoker, you need to quit for a multiple range of reasons, but with diabetes, a smoker has a heightened chance, an increased risk of developing diabetes. And what that does, all these risk factors, they contribute to the likelihood of having diabetes. And once you do have that diagnosis of diabetes, it's really the complications that you are trying to avoid, and you want to really maintain your sugar levels in a good range so that you don't manifest some of these complications that could potentially be deadly.
Okay, I'll just make a quick confession here before you catch me out.
Okay.
Because you've talked about lifestyle, smoking, this and that. I'll confess to you that I'm a sweet tooth.
Okay.
How do I manage? I'm a sweet tooth, and I have no apologies for that. I'm going to remain a sweet tooth for as long as. So how do I balance it?
Yeah.
Chocolates, candies, name it.
So it's about balance, right? You mentioned a good point. How do I balance it? That's key. When we talk about diet, that's another lifestyle modification, that nutritional intake that is key and necessary to help one either prevent the development of diabetes, or if one already has diabetes, live a healthy life while you still have that diagnosis of diabetes. It's about having a well-rounded, healthy diet, making sure you're incorporating fruits, vegetables, lean meat, good amount of protein as well, but you're trying to also minimize processed foods. You're minimizing snack foods, junk foods, foods that are not really in its natural state. Because the problem is, if one is a diabetic and you have diabetes and you're eating certain foods, like you mentioned, the sugar, cookies, the snacks, the cakes, all of those things, it's just gonna lead to elevations in that blood sugar.
Not my portion.
Okay, well, again, anyone could potentially develop this, but we're trying to reduce those risk factors, really focus on what you can do about it, and the things that you do have control over are really those lifestyle modifications. It's really the dietary piece, the exercise piece. Those are the things that you should be able to control. If you don't do that, that can set you up for certain problems over the course of time.
Now, could you give us a sense of these problems that we're talking about?
Absolutely. So herein lies the issue. There are certain ways to diagnose diabetes. We can get into that as well. But the complications, they range. Okay. One of the things that can occur include cardiovascular problems. So you can.
That's heart.
Heart problems, exactly. So one can develop coronary artery disease as a result of diabetes. You can also increase your risk of developing or having a heart attack, what we call a myocardial infarction. And one can also increase their risk of stroke due to diabetes. All right, those are just a few of the complications. Other complications can include something called neuropathy, meaning damage to the nerves. And it can also cause what we call nephropathy, damage to the kidneys over time. Diabetes can result in issues with the vision. I mentioned before some of the symptoms include blurry vision, visual disturbances, but it can cause something called retinopathy that could potentially lead to issues with blindness over the course of time. Diabetics also are at risk of complications, including amputations. So the list is quite lengthy, and you really want to try to avoid having any of those complications. And the best way to avoid complications is really maintaining those blood sugar levels at a good range over the course of time. The higher the levels are, or I should say the more uncontrolled those levels are, the likelihood for one to develop some of those complications.
And of course, what you're saying there is that you really have to be on top of your game.
Absolutely.
Right? Regular
Absolutely.
checks and all of that.
Yes, and that's the key.
Want to tell us a bit more about?
Yeah, so that's the key. You mentioned regular checkups. Preventive health is key. Prevention can actually save lives. Right. So when I see one of my patients at my practice coming in for an annual preventive health screening, what we're doing, we are screening the patient to ensure there are no issues with certain chronic medical conditions. So one of the screenings that we do, we screen for diabetes to ensure that there's no problem with diabetes. You would be surprised at how many people or patients that I see that are walking around with a diabetes diagnosis and they don't even know it until they have come to that checkup. And I'm sure the same thing happens here as well. In Nigeria, there are a lot of people that are probably walking around undiagnosed, not really realizing that some of the symptoms that they've been feeling for so long is attributed to diabetes. It seems to be that there is less of an emphasis on prevention here, and if we can emphasize more preventive strategies, preventive health care for all Nigerians, I think that would be beneficial to all. That way you can screen and pick up diagnoses early in time so that you can live a healthier life once you've diagnosed and are able to treat and manage the condition over the course of time. So prevention really is key.
Prevention would be key, certainly. But there are age issues too. Is there any time or right time for one to start checking, or is it from? So
during your adult years, when it comes to preventive health, as an adult, you can start having preventive health checkups. I see, as an internal medicine doctor, patients starting from the age of 18 and above. So that's a young adult. Yeah, that's a young adult. It is a young adult. But I think what the key is making sure that you actually have an annual checkup, an annual wellness evaluation. And certainly if you are one that has an aversion to going to see doctors, do not let any symptoms that you are feeling, don't slide it under the rug. You need to address that immediately. But prevention is key, getting annual checkups. And if you're symptomatic and you're experiencing symptoms, you need to get checked out immediately, irrespective of age. So we've crossed the prevention gate. We've failed. We've caught it. I mean, we've been diagnosed with diabetes. Is it reversible? So some of the numbers are reversible. So I'll put it into context. There are various ways to diagnose diabetes. One of the ways that the diagnosis can be made is with blood work, something called a hemoglobin A1C. This is the average 3-month marker that lets me know where your blood sugars, how well your blood sugars are being controlled over the course of 3 months. If that number is 6.5% or greater, you have diabetes. If the number is between 5.7 to 6.4, that's indicative of pre-diabetes, meaning that you're at risk of developing diabetes. If that number is under 5.7%, there's normal glycemic control. There's no issue with diabetes or pre-diabetes. So to put it into context, the big picture, when I am checking a patient's blood work and I'm checking that A1C, if they are now in the threshold, they've crossed that threshold and now they're in the diabetes category, the diabetes range, we have to do a few things. We have to make sure that we have a good care plan in place for the patient. That will involve discussing the lifestyle modifications. So the dietary piece, I get them connected and linked with a nutritionist because not everyone may be in tune with what the correct or the better food options would be to help manage the disease state. I make sure that they understand the importance of exercise, the recommended amount of exercise. So everyone really needs to be getting at least 30 minutes of exercise 5 times weekly in order to have the baseline amount of exercise to help get the heart pumping and to burn calories and do what you need to do to stay healthy. So 150 minutes of exercise weekly. And then we go to the pharmacotherapy. Is there an indication for medication? Typically, we start with oral medication. Metformin usually is the medication that we start off usually orally, but there are some patients that may require insulin injections, synthetic insulin. But the way that we manage the course of the disease state of diabetes, we are checking that hemoglobin A1C every 3 months.
I see your passion, and I really appreciate that as a professional, you've been able to break it all down for us. Now, is it available, all of these things you're talking about? Because we know that, yes, Dr. Nesochi is based in the United States. Is it, all these things, are they readily available for us? Do you know?
So, yeah, I am aware that these things are available, but I think one thing you're alluding to is the issue of access. So is the average Nigerian able to readily access preventive care services? Are they able to actually see that doctor for the annual preventive health evaluation once a year? If they are diagnosed with diabetes, can they afford the oral medication, the metformin? Yeah. Are they able to actually afford the cost that is attributed to having this diagnosis?
Precisely.
I'll tell you this, in Nigeria, the average Nigerian may not be able to afford these things, which is unfortunate, which leads us to have to figure out what needs to be done for government to figure out how they can allocate more funding in the healthcare sector, more specifically to preventive health. I think the scenario that I hear about more so here in Nigeria is that one ends up in the hospital after they've experienced a lot of these complications. They've been walking around undiagnosed, or maybe they knew about the diagnosis but couldn't afford the medication, and they're just a ticking time bomb, essentially, waiting for some adverse event to occur that renders them hospitalized. And that's the danger of it all. And that's why there needs to really be a push to ensure that healthcare is a human right for all Nigerians. Otherwise, the cycle continues. And
that's a great advocacy point for you. And I must say that we really appreciate that you've been able to come and spell this out to us. Dr. Nesochi, I want to thank you so much for being with us on the show today. We hope that sometime in the future, very soon, we will have you back here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So there we are, Dr. Nesochi. She's taken some time out to be with us to break down what we should know about diabetes. We want to thank her so much for coming. Next, John and Helen will continue with our regular show.